Thank you for joining us today. My name is Hannah Cox, and I am the Senior National Manager of Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. For those of you who aren't familiar with our organization, we have been working nationally since 2013 to talk to Republicans and conservatives and libertarians and others on the right-wing spectrum of the aisle about the problems of the death penalty and the reasons that it doesn't align with our values. We've seen tremendous response to this over the past decade. We have now seen 10 states that have Republican-sponsored bills in the past year alone. We've had nearly 60 Republican lawmakers signed on across those as sponsors. We've seen a piece of legislation pass with significant Republican support in a state every year for the past 2 years. And so we're gaining a tremendous amount of momentum. I think across the nation, people are recognizing that this is a system that fails to deter crime. It's extraordinarily costly. We don't get anything for the money that we spend, and it's resources that we're wasting that should be better spent on programs that could actually work to deter violence in the first place, and on solving more crimes, which we still do very little of in this country. I've got several of our representatives that we've been working with across the country joining me today. I'm going to introduce each of them and let them make their comments. I ask that you will hold your questions until the end. After all of our speakers present, you will be given a chance to have questions at the end of the panel, and you can ask them of the entire panel or of specific panelists. As we come together today, there are numerous issues we could talk about the death penalty and why it's flawed. There are, of course, many innocence issues with the system. We've seen one person exonerated nationally for every 9 executions. We also see that there is a lot of socioeconomic and racial and geographical bias in the system. And so there's a lot of issues we could dig into. But today, we're going to really focus in on something that is increasingly getting a lot more attention, and that is the cost of the system. I think most people know that the death penalty is extraordinarily expensive. It actually is the most expensive part of the criminal justice system on a per offender basis. Contrary to what many people believe, the reason for those costs are not because it takes too long. In fact, we see that the trial is where the majority of the costs stem from. Over 70% of the costs come from the trial alone. And we also see that the trial is about 4 times more expensive than the appellate process. And so really, even if you were to hasten the speed with which we carry out executions, we would not be addressing the extraordinary amount of money that we spend on this system. That's always been a problem for fiscal conservatives. We believe in limiting government and being frugal with our tax dollars and making sure that programs we support actually work to produce the outcomes that we desire. The death penalty fails on those fronts. As we increasingly face looming state budgetary crises in states due to the COVID-19 pandemic, though, this is an issue that is really rising in importance, and many state lawmakers are beginning to consider the death penalty as an obvious program to scrap as they struggle to find ways to pay for essential services in their states. We think that this is, of course, a common sense step in the right direction and should be the first thing to go. And it could obviously save a lot of money that could be redirected towards programs that could produce better public safety outcomes. With that said, I'm going to address each of our panelists and let them give you their remarks. So first, I would like to introduce Representative Brett Harrell out of Georgia.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you for inviting me to join the presentation this afternoon. My name is Brett Harrell. I represent a community about 30 miles east of Atlanta in the state of Georgia. I've been in the legislature approximately 10 years. My background is a small business person. I currently chair our Ways and Means Committee, which is responsible for tax policy and other financial issues that affect the state of Georgia. I have always been what I consider to be a fiscal conservative. And so being a small business owner, whenever the government gets in your wallet, whether as a business person or as an individual citizen, it always raised great concern for me that the government should be as small as possible, should spend our money fiscally responsibly, prudently, wisely. And these are a number of issues that brought my attention to the death penalty. Georgia, with regard to the pandemic, however, I will tell you we're actually fending fairly well. We had a much tighter budget season, as most states did. However, for our fiscal year ended June 30th, net sales tax and income tax revenues were actually up over the prior year. We're certainly in a much tighter situation, but we're faring fairly well. The death penalty, however, as you mentioned, Hannah, in your opening remarks, is an incredibly expensive proposition. Evidence suggests, study after study, that is not, and a deterrent to crime. And we have alternatives such as life without parole. Georgia has a life without parole statute. So as someone that is fiscally conservative and prefers a smaller government, then consistent with the efficient implementation of government, the death penalty fails on all those measures. In fact, a number of years ago in the state of Georgia, Lincoln County, a smaller county in the southern part of the state, had a death penalty case where the DA took a case to trial and failed to win the conviction. He was so determined to retry that same case, the Board of Commissioners there said, we're not going to pay for another case. The DA sued the Board of Commissioners. The commissioners were actually jailed for a short period of time, brought the second case, lost a second time, and the Board of Commissioners had no choice but to raise property taxes to pay for that failed litigation. So again, I think all the issues that you suggested at the beginning are true in Georgia too. One of the things Georgia has never done, however, is to have a Georgia-specific study on the cost of the death penalty. So I would like to see us move in that direction as well and really document a Georgia-specific cost on this particular program. Since the reimposition of the death penalty in 1976 or 73, Georgia has exonerated 6 people from death row. So we know that a government, for those of us that prefer a smaller, efficient government, this program is not a small and efficient government program, and the likelihood is great that government has executed innocent people through a program like that. So someone that is also social conservative and someone that is pro-life should also see the death penalty as very problematic, in that the likelihood is very great that innocent have been executed as well. With that, I'll be glad to answer questions at the appropriate time, and appreciate again you asking me to join you on this Zoom meeting.
Yeah, thank you so much, Representative Harrell. Next, I'd like to introduce Representative Jared Olson from Wyoming.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Hannah, and thanks, Conservatives Concerned, for having me. I always enjoy talking about the death penalty and the efforts all across the country to repeal it. I think that that's what matters most, is that we continue the conversation and keep talking about it. So I'm Representative Jared Olson. I'm from Wyoming. I represent Cheyenne, and my district is literally downtown Cheyenne. So it's about as urban as you get in the state of Wyoming. And so that means that I have a very unique makeup of constituents compared to a lot of the state. But I still have, the way it's designed, my district still reaches out into county land. And so I still have some of those traditional interests. Even kind of a fun note, I have an oil refinery right in the middle of my district. So definitely represent Wyoming in a very unique way. I became involved with the position of the death penalty in a unique way. I actually started in my political life not really thinking about it. And I had what I call the default position. My position on the death penalty was that I supported it. But that's simply because I never took any time to think about it. And it's maybe one of those things where you have in your mind a list of positions that one side of the spectrum believes in and the other believes in. And so, okay, here's my list. And didn't really put a lot of thought into it. And in Wyoming, there was a small group of Republicans, Democrats, and I mean very small, just maybe 5, 6 legislators who were much more liberty minded, and they would traditionally bring a death penalty bill in Wyoming, and they would rotate every year ceremonially. There'd be a Republican one year and a Democrat the next year. And so I've served in the Wyoming House of Representatives for only 4 years, 2 terms. I'm up for re-election right now. And so in my first term, this bill shows up, and that's the moment when I really begin to think about it. And I view myself as a fiscal conservative. I view myself very socially conservative, actually, as well, and liberty-minded. So all of those things, as I thought about it, I said, I'll co-sponsor this with you. And it was a Democrat who sponsored it at that moment. And the bill went nowhere. And I learned that that's the history of the bill. It just goes into a committee and it dies. And the ceremony is that we put forth the bill and we brought the idea forward. So, so the interest groups, religious organizations and other groups that were involved with this bill, they came to me afterwards and they were really surprised that I had signed my name to it because of my conservative credentials in the state. And so they said, hey, would you be interested in being the Republican sponsor? Because that was what was next up in the rotation. And I said, you know, I'm only going to do it if we're actually going to run the bill. I want to really run the bill. I like to win. And so I want to see the bill go out of committee. I want to see us actually abolish the death penalty. So if you're all ready for a fight, then I'm ready for a Wyoming fight. And they said, let's do it. And so we ran that bill, and it shot out of committee in the House with sponsorships from Democrats, Republicans, leaders in the minority, the majority party, Speaker of the House on the bill. It was a pretty powerful coalition. Made it its way through the House of Representatives for the first time in Wyoming history, dropped over to the Senate, shot out of the Senate committee, Judiciary Committee, and onto the Senate floor. And at that time, I'm meeting with the governor, trying to get his opinion, making sure I got it lined up so when it hits his desk. And unfortunately, we fell 4 votes short in the Senate, which really surprised all of us. And so that's how I got involved. And as I became more involved, I learned more about the death penalty, that it's not a deterrence, that is insanely costly in the state of Wyoming. I'm also similar to Representative Harrell's Ways and Means Committee. We don't have a Ways and Means Committee anymore. We have an Appropriations Committee, which is our budget committee, and then we have a Revenue Committee. And so I serve on the Appropriations Committee, so I deal with the state's budget. Became intimately familiar with the appropriation that we make fruitlessly to the Death Penalty Defense Fund in Wyoming. Became even more agitated with a waste of taxpayer dollars and the desire to turn that money into real good in the justice system. And so we just continued the efforts, and this last year we ran the bill again. We ran it with co-sponsors that were, we had more co-sponsors than we had the first go around, 40 legislators, and there's only 90 in Wyoming, so we almost had everyone sign up. But as the rules work and the vote majorities work, it still wasn't enough to get it through the system. So we're gonna be back with even more co-sponsors, and this time even more votes, Hannah.
I'm betting on it. I know you will. I think that we'll see Wyoming repeal very shortly, and Jared's been an incredible sponsor in that state. So thanks for all you've done, Jared. And lastly, I'd like to introduce Representative Niraj Antani from Ohio.
Representative, I had you muted and there you go. Wonderful.
All right, thanks for having me, Hannah. Much appreciated. Niraj Antani, state representative from Ohio. And, obviously we are, sort of in a new era here in our nation and in Ohio as well. And as our states face budget pressures, we have to think creatively about how to balance our budget. In Ohio, we are required to balance our budget. And so, in fact, a few months ago in July or early June, the governor cut $775 million from our budget. We're projecting another $2.4 billion shortfall in this coming fiscal year. And so in Ohio, we spend about $3 million on indigent capital defense. That's money that is allocated to hire defense attorneys for those charged with capital crimes. And that's just sort of, the straight dollars that are allocated for that. It does not count, the other court costs and the other, frankly, time costs that it takes to try these cases. And so, right now there is that $3 million that is allocated in the budget that, could be used for other purposes. The governor cut over $300 million from K through 12 education in order to balance our budget because of the COVID economic pressures. And that money that, is lying there could be going to to education, to other critical programs and services that would actually save lives. And, you know, in addition, we have not had an execution since July of 2018 because the courts ruled that, you know, our protocol was not okay, and we have not been able to acquire the drugs for lethal injection since July of 2018. So now, you know, our death penalty is sort of, you know, in a moratorium, more or less, not by choice. And yet, you know, we still have this money that is tied up that, you know, could be used for other purposes. So, you know, that's where we are. You know, I am, you know, against the death penalty for a variety of reasons. The fiscal impact is one of them, but certainly, you know, I think as conservatives, you know, and fiscal conservatives, we can understand that, you know, this is not, you know, taxpayer dollars that is being well used.
Thank you, Representative Antani. I want to thank all of our panelists today. Like I said, they've each been incredible leaders and transformational type representatives in their respective state legislatures. So we really appreciate the work that they're doing. And I believe that it's really landing with conservatives who are recognizing that this is a failed big government program that fails to measure up to our values of limiting government, adhering to fiscal responsibility, and protecting the sanctity of human life. There are many obvious reasons to end the death penalty in this country, but certainly with the added pressures of state budgetary crises, I think this is something that all of our representatives across the country should be looking at in each of their states. Our panelists will now take questions. If you have a question, please use the raise your hand function, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. When our webinar admin calls on you, you will see a notification asking you to unmute yourself, at which time we'll be able to hear you and you can introduce yourself and ask your question. If you're having trouble with any of that, please use your chat feature and our webinar admin will be able to assist you. So just a moment, let people get their questions in.
Jill Nolan, please go ahead.
Hey, this question is for Chairman Harrell. This is Jill Nolan in Georgia. I just wanted to follow up on something you said about there having been a analysis of the cost in Georgia, and I wondered if that's something you plan to pursue or kind of lead the charge on in Georgia, doing some sort of analysis of what it costs.
Right. Thank you, Jill. What we've seen across the country is, you know, on average, it can be 3 times as expensive to go through the entire process on a death penalty case versus a sentence or in a trial with life without parole. And the evidence suggests it's probably going to be similar in Georgia. But exactly, we're exactly going to do that. I'm going to speak with members of the legislature about authorizing and funding a Georgia-specific study. So, you know, as you know, so often when we're in committee hearings, people like to know things are being tried and what's working and not working in other states. But at the end of the day, very often you want to know what is state-specific and what's going to work best in your state. So that's why I think I'm pretty confident the results are going to be similar to what other states have seen. But yes, absolutely, I would like to move forward and do what I can to get that work done. There are a number of groups actively at work in Georgia in this area, working on death penalty issues, and I know that they would be willing to provide support and provide information so that we could get a Georgia-specific study. The bill in Georgia was introduced year before last. My calculation is we're about 12 votes short. Georgia's 180 members in the House. So I think this conservative concerns about the death penalty focus is important, and to focus on those fiscal costs will be important to us to gain those last few votes necessary to move the issue forward in Georgia. Thank you.
If there's anyone else with any questions, please feel free to raise your hand in your Zoom. We'll get those answered.
Okay, I think we will go ahead and wrap. I don't see any other questions at this time. I encourage anyone who would like more information to check out our website, conservativesconcern.org, and you can find plenty of contact information on there. If you have follow-up questions, we'd be happy to speak with you or connect you with any of our panelists. Thank you to each of our representatives, and I hope you all have a great day.